because today we have the pleasure of welcoming two members of a band which, if I'm not totally mistaken, was the first band I ever owned all the records that were officially on the market of when I was like 12 or whatever. And so, yes, we do have a bit of an interest here as well. So bear with us with our little childhood trauma psychoanalysis here. And welcome to the stage, Front Two for Two.
Bonjour.
Well, and I hope it's okay that we do the interview in English, because apparently my French totally sucked, and
Mine too.
That's all right then. Yeah, and I mean, the reason why I didn't dare to introduce you guys with your names was that I'm pretty sure up until actually booking the flights, we wouldn't really know them, because as back then, if you looked at the record covers or credits, mostly you were credited with some sort of code names. Now, these days people try to expose absolutely everything that there is to know about them, and a lot of things that are not to know about them in the public arena, on the internet or whatever, whereas you went totally the opposite way. Can you give us a little bit of an idea what the concept behind that was?
I'll start. Hello, everybody.
How would you introduce yourself in the first place?
We are just member of Front Two for Two. That's the way we see it.
No,
generally.
but as a name, like... Hello,
okay, my name is Patrick Codenys.
Yeah. I'm Daniel.
And to answer your question, Front Two for Two started not really like any other band, because some people in the band come from other artistic disciplines like graphism and so on, design. And also the technology in the 80s was just blooming, especially synthesizer at a cheap price, so affordable. And that was also the trigger of electronic music entering a more popular era. At the time, I remember, for us, it was more important to develop a logo, to develop a strong image, almost like, I won't say like an advertisement company, but something of that kind, because the way we had to handle music with the type of machines we had was very rigorous, and we needed a lot of discipline. So there was no time for the rock and roll bullshit stereotypes, like tattoos, piercing girls, and so it was just manual and very complicated machines for us at the time, very stiff mathematic type of machines. So the whole attitude was like more based on a discipline, because that was the only way to make it. So very little reference to rock, blues, or any Anglo-Saxon genre. The band was more inspired by architecture, for instance, because architecture has also similar structural way of handling artistic elements or elements that would fit better for us into our type of approach of the music. Influenced by cinema also, because those machines had a sort of dreaming way of bringing sounds to life, although it was difficult. So we were very away from the classical, like I said, American or English way of approaching music. It was also important, we coming from Brussels, Belgium, which is a kind of country with a very small background, so it was very open to assimilate other culture and bring everything together. I'm not too long, just keep on going a little bit. So basically when we started, it was more like an incorporated, like a logo. No need to bring the people ahead. In that matter, it's closer to certain DJs or live DJ sets, or people who are more working for an image rather than really their own personal little star feelings. I'm not going to keep on talking about this, but this is basically to answer your question about the logo. It's really linked with the fact that it's really a concept.
And what we discovered also is that the people are not really in. When you see products, because when we began, our music was a product that we had to bring to the public, and when you go and buy Red Bull, you don't care who is the boss, who makes it, everything. You're interested in the product. So not putting in faces on who we are, the name of the guys, draw the people in by your image. You let them dream. They can, out of the product, they can take whatever they want. If you tell them it's that guy who makes it, he is that old, he likes that kind of stuff, you remove a lot of possibilities for them to imagine what your music is saying. Because if you say, I like guitar music, maybe they won't be interested in your music at all anymore. So the mystery of not knowing who is behind the product is an interesting concept, and it's not used too much even today. You know everything about Amy Winehouse and things like that, and it would be maybe better not to know that, because you will find all the things you want in the music more than. And it will maybe not degrade the way you listen to the music. It will not color the music or the packaging around the music. That was another reason why we didn't want people to know who we are.
So, in the first place, you have this enigmatic characteristic to lure people into getting into it a little more, but at the same time, you do deliver that projection foil for everyone to, as you said, put in there everything that they could possibly imagine. But at the same time, how did that tie in with the advent of new technologies that probably called for a different approach? Because obviously, I mean, you said earlier synthesizers were becoming more affordable, but at the same time, I mean, I remember I was like far away from being able to afford an emulator or something that you guys were using, like far, far away. But I mean, can you probably, now we are so used to get like the emulation of whatever, can you probably, from a synth lover's point of view, describe the picture of that sense?
Yeah. To make a parenthesis with the emulator, it's the price of a car. And I decided not to have a car, but to buy a machine. So there's a lot of people who have cars here and would be able probably to buy an emulator in the same sense. But this was very particular. Anyway, to come back to the technology of the time, when you are in the early 80s and you have those new machines coming in front of you, and you're living in Brussels, you don't have the same feeling as a guy living in New York or a guy living in Kingston. You don't want necessarily to do reggae music or to do underground urban music or whatever, or rock music. You have a very specific sensitivity, and your chance is that in front of you, you have a machine that is also a sort of bastard, like in the meaning doesn't have a father, doesn't have a mother. There's no reference. In 81, a synthesizer is a black box with knobs. So you don't have to try to play guitar with it. You don't have to try to be, I don't know, Jefferson Airplane or any other band. You have a new machine, a new concept. You can start from scratch. This is an opportunity. For us, we thought, maybe here we have a machine that's going to be able to express something of our culture, because this machine is as naked as our musical culture. And when I speak about Brussels, it doesn't tell you anything, because there's no bands coming from Brussels. Maybe more now, but there wasn't. And so you think, here I have a chance to create a new aesthetic, to create a new concept, a new vision of music, because I have an instrument that doesn't call for any reference. You know as well as I do that in blues, rock, jazz, there are recipes, bass, guitar, whatever, there are recipes. And even electronic music as today still has a lot of Anglo-Saxon bands have that reflex to bring electronic music into a rock feeling. And we have some stereotypes like that too, because you cannot deny the importance of the Anglo-Saxon backgrounds. But nevertheless, at the time, there was really an opportunity, and I say this because, I mean, there's a lot of Spanish people here in the room. Those instruments have the ability to maybe bring your expression that is linked to your roots or your feelings or your culture more than any other musical instrument. And I believe there's no rule. So this is basically the way we approached it. Now, through time, every period of time had his technology, because at the time there were not too many softwares on the market. There were just mostly hardwares. And the machines were very specific. So basically we did almost one album per technology. Like you could say, first album was analog, second one was analog but another development, third one was DX7 algorithm, first digital. And each time we were starting an album, it was basically partly the instrument who was trying to tell us what expression, what aesthetic we could try to find in that machine. Today, a lot of softwares are developed to just give you what the audience wants. At the time, you had to create your own aesthetic. That was something very interesting, because even today, those are good reflexes. To not take for granted what you have in front of you, even if it sounds good. And we're not going to go through all the campaigns with it, but every album was a different concept visually, because there's a parallel with the graphic art, because we come from Amiga up to the Macintosh now, or whatever you use, PCs. So there is also a sort of curve with the graphic art and the whole imagery that went with the technology. But what is very important is the creative process for everyone. I think it's something, and you shouldn't be blinded by what is in music actually, because at the time, like I said, cinema was an inspiration, architecture, graphism, design, interior design. Very often in art, when you try to do something from scratch, it's a matter of being able to translate things, translate emotions, translate an aesthetic. I see that here there are some guys who expose sort of contemporary art objects. An object can be a source of inspiration. For us at the moment, at a certain time, the technology of the TV and the sampling, you leave the world of notes and you enter the world of sounds, which is wider. So there was a lot of potential at the time.
This absence of history, to a certain degree, was a big chance for you as well, because it was mostly uncharted territory that you were entering. Well, I'm kind of grateful for understanding, through you guys probably, when in the early this century or millennium, when people like the Black Stroke guys or whatever started sampling you, I finally understood like how heavily people from the soul and funk background were opposing hip-hop in the early 80s, because it was drawing back from that reference. With always heading towards a futuristic approach and trying to take it a step further, how did that feel for you when you first realized, like, oh gosh, we're like part of the historic context now?
It makes you feel old.
No, but it doesn't. You don't feel like that. You never. Sometimes even when you read it, it's hard to believe it. You know your history. You know why you used some machines, because it was the best way to translate what you are. A guitar. I would have done, rock music, and also you don't have to forget that we still are not musicians. I never wanted to learn to play keyboard, because I think it's good to be able to play keyboard, but when you want to translate the things in another way, not being able to play an instrument is a good thing, because you don't fall into stereotypes. so the translation of what we wanted to do as Europeans, because as Europeans in the 80s, you wanted to start music, there is nothing that enabled you to create something new except the machines or synthesizers. If you went to a dulcimer, if you want to take a folklore or guitar, automatically you would be drawn to that. And that's why even today when people say you did that, or there was no other way, so we don't see that.
Before we go deeper in probably this contrast of, because you mentioned it a lot, the Anglo-Saxon influence, which I guess is pretty strong for everyone in this room, probably to make it a little less abstract, could we go back in time and play something from the starting points and take it from there?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, to make a short introduction, you're going to hear that most of the beats and the way to do music is quite metronomic, because it's linked with the type of instrument at the time. And we always wanted to work with limits. So it's very important, because at the time there were limits. So to work within a limit and take a few instruments to decide what you're going to do has always been a way of working for us. So here we're going to play a few of the live. On va faire ça? On va jouer, tu veux jouer?
No, I don't know which. You want to start with the really early stuff or not?
How early do you mean when you say really
I can
early?
go
Like
back
before,
the experimental things I did in my room or things like that,
Okay.
and I can go to the live that we do now today.
Okay, I guess people would be pretty interested in hearing those experiments as
Okay.
well. But when I say early, obviously like the first commercial releases and like talking from somewhere between 81 to 83, that sort of
No,
stage.
but that's when we started.
Yeah. I thought you were selling for
From
something
242
maybe
is
earlier.
my first band and the only band also. So when
First love and you never
yeah,
split.
when we started, that's what's still there. Yeah, no, I can play something from the first album then.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. Not working. Okay, so it's 30 years old, of course. And going back in that time, you see that what we did is also, we always wanted not to be making noise. Synthesize, we were influenced, of course, by all the musique concrète and all that stuff, but we wanted to bring a popular aspect to the music, because something that we missed was abstract music with rhythm. At the time, there was research in that domain, but they didn't go into what we called dance. You had bands with rhythm, but it was never the dance thing, and that's what we wanted to introduce to our music, was research, but also research that would speak to the people. And we thought the way to speak to the people with noise was through rhythm, in fact, which is still something that is done a lot today. If you listen to Pansonic, for instance, they have all bases of incredible noise, and they simplify, it's not a nice word to say it, but they put that rhythm so that it still speaks to the people. Because if you remove the rhythm, it could be noise like anybody else would be able to do it. And that's what, at that time, we tried to do too, is put all the research, the collage that we did, and you know, always put something in there that makes it simpler. You have more noise?
Well, Well, speaking about the times of geography, which interestingly enough you pronounce in the French way, which
Because there is no way, like Fronto for two, Spanish, any language can do it. So there is, for us, there is not one way to pronounce that. And especially geography, the first album, we wanted the same thing. That if somebody wants to say geography, no problem.
Right. And I mean, you used even the 242, and there's shitloads of samples on there that pronounce it in all different kind of languages. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but there was this time when all you actually knew about a project was the physical thing that you had in your hand. And obviously you were not part of teenage magazines or most music magazines or whatever. It was just people having the actual records and other people telling you about that record and passing that on. And yeah, so you couldn't really picture like, oh, where are these guys actually coming from in the first place? And like,
but at the same time, you don't know where you go either, because you really work like a cell in your own basement, let's say, which, but you limit it also with your instrument. Most of those tracks are 2 4-track recorders, so you have your machines. There were no memory presets to save your sounds, so you were doing your sound on a modular, and there was no way to store it. So basically, you go ahead and you stay in a very close world. We haven't spoken about the live presentation, but in live the problem remained the same because there was no formula, like a rock band or something. Remember going to the States and the guy saying, "Here's your riser for your drummer." We said, "We have no drummer." I said, "Where do I put the amps for the guitar?" "We have no guitar." The guy said, "You're not a band." You know, so in the 80s it was very tough to force your way. But like I said, it's discipline. It's mostly what happened at the time.
Well, before we touch on discipline, can we have maybe something of geography that's a little bit more beat-driven in a way?
From the early or whatever?
Yeah, please.
Beat-driven. I'll go for the live thing. Operating. There is no video, I suppose. No. Moment.
What you're gonna hear here is mostly live sets, so it's 8 tracks plus.
Okay, we were jumping a bit in time there for a second, but the last piece, Take One, came out in 1983, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you said that's the track that took us to America. Like, so we're definitely talking pre-Chicago House, pre-Detroit Techno, and all of that. And nevertheless, obviously, now looking back, you can totally hear the direct connection between the two. Can you probably paint us the picture of you getting over there? Because, I mean, yeah, you're there in Brussels, and that's one thing. And at the time, obviously, we're all bombarded with these images of America, and then getting there and also getting there as an artist.
Yeah, for us, also, it's only our second record. We did one album, we do a second EP, and straight away the guys from Brussels are invited in the United States, which was at the time fantastic, because not a lot of European bands except Anglo-Saxons bands or from England had that chance. So for us it was great that in the United States somebody heard the track and wanted us to go there. Except that was fabulous. The rest of the thing, when we were there, it was surprising, in fact, that there was a connection between what we tried to do as Belgians. I'm Italian, but it's Europe, I suppose. But doing in Belgium, and that we found a connection straight away in the United States. And that from there, we met a lot of the people we talk about that came at the gigs. It was incredible, in fact.
I think also that the live shows to speak about the Detroit scene, and so I think what was probably interesting for those people when they saw Front 242 is that we had a formula live with electronic drums, but a guy standing, two singers and a keyboard. It was very energetic because on stage we had like army uniform. It was like really full of energy. It was not like a lot of people were saying that electronic bands were cold because you had only guys behind computers. Here it was very danceable. That's also in electronic music something you could hear some dance track with Kraftwerk, more and less, but here those tracks were very danceable. And also we had to force the technology also because most of the PAs there are rock PAs, like I said, some even in mono. So you really force something, and for those people who have a tradition of seeing rock bands every day in their clubs, to suddenly have a total different configuration, electronic guys dancing, whatever, and this kind of sound must have been something that brought them other ideas or impressed them or something like that. I think the possibility to come and play live electronic music is a huge step ahead because it made people understand that electronic music was not only a computer freak or a machine freak type of music.
And also, the way we misused synthesizer or rhythm to do the music there, we also misused the PA systems, usually because the PAs were whatever. I think it's better not to try to make good music on, if you get a mono speaker, try to surprise the people. So what we did is misuse the technology of the PA to our advantage, of course. We had the reputation to play very loud, but when the PA sucks, make that suck a part of your music, make it good. There is nothing in music, there is no accident, that's bad. There is never anything that, for us, is bad. Even today, if there is a problem with a PA, I try to see what good can it do to the show we bring. If I see that by pushing the drums, it sounds better, then that's what we do. And that's what we did all the time in the United States. And that's also maybe why we left an imprint, because we always went up to the limit of what people wouldn't expect you to do.
Now, when you're using a drummer on stage that uses triggered drums, it's slightly opposite to that machine ethos of using a sequenced drum loop. How do you get the two together, or how do you dehumanize a human on the stage again?
But it was always an addition. It was a percussion player. That's why we never wanted somebody to sit down and to play the bass drum, because that's the machine thing. It's the bass drum is the machine. So we always, with the limit of tracks we had at that point, we always used machines to do the basic thing, and people to, even if the people didn't play, the music still stood there. That was one of the bases of Front 242, is that it was one of the first ideas was, if it's playback, we don't care. We're here to put a show down. We're here to surprise the people by using smoke that hurts, because in the beginning we also did that. For us it was a complete package. It was not only the music, but there was the lack of light or too much light, but we also used army smoke or police tear gas, things like that in the concert room, so that the people who came to a gig of Front 242 had a complete experience. They were like, what did happen to me now? Today you can't do that because you get sued.
An element that is also important is that the education of the ear of the people, because in the 80s, when you were playing with a rhythm box, people were so used to hear real drummers that they would say, oh, this is not human, this sucks, it's too mathematic, we don't like it. As today, it's almost the opposite. When you hear a drummer, you think, oh, the guy is not on time because your ear has been educated through all the evolution of electronic music to become more mathematic. We listen to music on a more rational way. Before you had a human touch, which was great, and a lot of electronic acts now are trying to go back to that sort of human touch, but it's more conflictual than at the time. At the time when you had a stiff electronic music like that, a lot of people rejected it systematically. I mean, they even call us disco, whatever. So you have to keep in the context because people educate their ears very differently. When you listen to music today, even electronic music is very sophisticated, sampled, totally assimilated.
Like every car
so
AdWords.
your audience is changing also, you know. So.
And what we also used at that time was we did playback, and we were not afraid to show the people. So the recorder was on stage; it was center stage.
Actual tape. Yeah.
The tape recorder was on stage; it was center stage where the singer would be. So, and we had a lot of fights even with promoters about that, because they expect a live band to play live, and we were really one of the bands that push the limits. Now today it's ordinary. But I think if you create music, the things that you don't want people to know sometimes are an advantage. Use them, you know, using the tape machine, showing the people that if you don't push play, there's nothing happening, is a good thing somewhere.
To which degree was there a connection or an interaction with the more poppier side of things? Because when you talk about banging percussion, electronics, drums, there's this infamous scene on the Live in Hamburg video of Depeche Mode when they are getting into this moment, I think during Master & Seventh or something, when they hit on these huge, with these metal sounds and on these huge Simmons drums, I presume, and that has an incredibly powerful moment, which is incredibly futuristic and very archaic at the same time.
Well, if you want to go to the roots of this kind of music, I would then rather make a reference to industrial music, which existed before the 80s, like men like Throbbing Gristle, Cabaret Voltaire. Those are real industrial bands using noise, organizing noise, using metal. I think Depeche Mode, and to a certain limit, Front 242, have vulgarized it in their music because,
which in your thing is not necessarily a bad thing. Just
no,
to clarify.
because it's important at the time. In the 80s, it's important to try to touch people with electronic music. Otherwise, it never can bloom. Or you have to make concession. I remember on our albums, on 10, 12 tracks, there were maybe 7, 8 tracks of research, clumsy, bizarre things. But also you needed to have 3, 4 good songs to drive the album, that people would at least catch your concept and enter in what you're doing. And then after listening to the catchy songs or gimmick songs, maybe go more into research. Because after all, even as today, I think electronic music is still in a sort of area where there's a lot of research that can be done on all levels. And I would like it to experiment more. The problem is that today there's a sort of culture of results. And all the softwares are made for that. It's a culture of quick result. But I mean, you guys are artists, and artists need a whole life to develop what is their vision or emotion or change. I mean, I often say, at 50 years old, if you're a painter, you consider as being a young painter. So let time go and experiment. I think it's very important to be able to do research.
Research is one thing, but as you mentioned the live element, a lot of that show was about agileness, strength, almost aggressiveness, and youth, therefore, almost tying in with a cult of youth that, especially in Europe, has always weird connotations.
But you need, yeah, I know what you mean. We need to be extreme because otherwise you don't go through in the 80s with electronic music. If you're not extreme, if you're not military, I mean, at the time, you don't have to forget that a lot of movies like Alien, Blade Runner, even Rambo, whatever, on Hollywood, you could have an aggression, an energy. It was allowed. But when you bring it to music, because music somehow is a quite very conservative, and we were coming like from progressive music or whatever, and if you want to shake the establishment, you have to be extreme. And we had connotation, we've been called fascist, Nazis, whatever, you know, just because there was that energy, there were like those, like Daniel said, that smoke on stage, there were like very strong imagery. We based also a lot of things on propaganda, commando, raids. They were all ways to enter very drastically and very aggressively in that world of music that was made of who's the best drummer, who's the best guitarist, and a lot of musicians somehow.
And also what made Front 242 more than the music, more than the records, is the live thing. If we hadn't played live, we wouldn't be what we are today. Because live also, it gives you the possibilities to go further. A record, you know, it's like, it's a record. It records something you do. Live, you can test a lot of stuff musically, also the way you present yourself. So I would say even that live is a more important part of what Front 242 music has become or was after that, because what we tried to do is translate the energy that we felt while playing live. We tried to translate that to records, which was always the main critic, I think, at the time is, yeah, the record is great, but it doesn't sound like Front 242 live. And that's where we made all our advance. And I think bands today, good bands today, still live, it pushes your boundaries more than when you sit in your room doing music with a computer. And I think playing live is the main, could be the main influence on how you make music after that.
And just for the record, that doesn't mean that you have to know all the blues scales by heart that there ever were.
No, like I said, I still, if you play me a note, I still can say what it is, and I don't care.
Now, people have been seeing these slideshows up there, which are mostly covers of records or stickers and T-shirt motifs and all these kind of things. One interesting thing is, I mean, you said you've been called many things. Actually, the eclecticism that you draw from, I mean, it ranges from like futurist movements to like communist propaganda to Nazi type of dictatorship issues. Now, could you probably paint us a little bit of the historic context in which it happened? Because there was a little bit of paranoia going on in the 80s period.
Yeah.
But there was that feeling of it's the end of the world almost. And we played on that because it also touched us. We also had the impression that this is the last record because maybe tomorrow we'll be dead, I don't know. There was that Cold War, everything. And for us, I think, I don't know why, because we are graphic artists, there was no camp. For us, we could play with all imagery. There is, of course, something that you don't cross. You don't put Adolf there, because that's maybe going too far. But otherwise, for me, there was no limit going into the, you know, we take from communism, fashion, from everywhere, because we're graphists and we don't care, you know. The image is more important than the message of the image.
It's also the Cold War. You have blocks. It's very, again, drastic. Binary, and like we were talking before, it forces you to take decisions. Yeah. There's also a state of emergency, which can be sometimes a good way to work because you're challenged constantly. You always have to find. There's a challenge with instruments, there's a challenge. And if you're an artist, you're kind of a sponge to the world or a mirror to the world. So you take the whole political situation, you take the whole like hope and distress of the world, and you try, like I said before, it's very often a matter of being able to translate things. When you create or you have ideas, you basically translate things through your body, and at the time, like Daniel said, there was that tension, and that tension was working also with that challenge we had with the instruments. With the limits we had, it was very edgy, very sharp. As today, you still can do it if you limit yourself, but if you just go on the web and you need applications or a way to do music, you basically have everything in front of your eyes.
And it was also, at that time, it's the imagery influences the music is influenced by the imagery. I suppose if we made music in the 60s, the flower thing, imagery and that music was linked. Also, there was that peace and love and stop war and everything. And all the music created from, I don't know, 66 up to 70 was very influenced by that. We are just the EPs of the 80s, I suppose, because what influenced us was the political climate and the images from the groups. That's it.
And also, as every budding hip-hop MC knows, controversy now and then does help just a little bit in getting yourself known. And
oh yeah, we did really very dared stuff that was dared, because we played gigs and we had like 30 guys behind us with flags. It can be a fascist image. It can be it can be interpreted as you want it, and that's what people did. But we did festivals with, and they stood the complete gig behind us, like in Nuremberg, I would say. But if you don't dare do that, we wanted to be the soundtrack and the film of the music business, and there is only one way to achieve it, is to make mistakes or to do everything you think is right to get there.
And apart from like a lot of the aims that you might have, I somehow take it that playfulness with controversy adds a little bit of fun now and then too. I mean, just, like how people are like Pavlovian dogs, that you just feed that kind of thing, and they will also go off that way, and then you go like, oh, but I'm going to feed them this thing, which is totally contrary, and like, now what?
But what we never wanted the people to know is who we are, because when you do something like that, there is cynicism, there is humor. We are quite funny, but we have I don't have a limit in what I can laugh about, what I can play with. There is no limit, but that's never translated in the thing. So when we did something, we knew very well. For us, it was humor or it was serious, and the people. That's what we always did with the music and the image. The people can take it and make what they want of it. And of course, if your tendency is more extreme right, you think front to foot. If your tendency is more ecological, you will think, wow, this is a great ecological statement. We've seen it we use now La Charte des droits de l'homme. You translate that, the Charter of the Human Rights thing? We play that now as a video on one of our pieces. And it was not our choice. It's the video guy who worked with this has total freedom to do whatever. And we've seen the reactions of the people who think that we make a statement. And for us, it's just, you can believe it or not. I won't say what I do. But using that with the Front 242 music drowned the people in, and we got a big applause just because we did that. And it was not meant to be.
I think it's a matter of taking a stand, even as an artist today. I think what is difficult that's why I spoke about research, because it gives you time to analyze things and consider things. We are in a culture where there's a lot of recycling. When people think that, oh, I'm going to take just like dub and some blues and mix it with hip hop. I recycle 3 different things, 3 different genres, and it brings something new. But somehow it has to be deeper than that. I think you have to go to the essence. The technology is blinding you more easily because, again, you're quickly to a result. I think it's important to try to find the essence of things. Whatever is your path, whatever is your direction, is maybe come back to something more substantial, because what people are looking for is sometimes leaders, substance, more than forms. Forms, there's a lot of things that are now on the market to allow you to do almost anything. But that substance is really something that is important to go and try to find in our daily life.
Sorry, another thing that I think is important when I do music, I always in the back of my head want to know how will this go live, or will this be received in a living room, and the music that I make must translate already in the back of my head very well for that, otherwise it's a no-go for me. And I think if you do music today, if you don't think about how will I present it, how will it be received, already something is missing. You see that with bands like Daft Punk, the live show, there wasn't one, but everything has been taken to a direction where that thing becomes even more important than the creation of the music at first. I think that the end result should always be a multimedia spectacle. When you do the music, you have to think, oh, if ever I have to play it live, will I do it? If you don't know it already when you do the music, there is maybe a little problem. For me, that's my philosophy of doing a bass line. I always want to know if I play it in a big PA, how will it sound? And if I can translate it, I drop it.
To which degree do you think did you change your live show? Because obviously, I mean, in the first years, it would be something that would be very close to, I don't know, a scene from Cruising in you know, it would appeal to a totally different crowd, but your crowd also grows with you. There's new people coming in, and you can't be pretending to be this young commando unit climbing down whatever kind of building. Like, so how did you have to change that?
Well, then you have help of some technology like projection, for instance, more accurate light shows. You bring the edgy part on other levels. Although live, the guys on stage, the 2 singers are still dancing. I mean, they come back in the dressing room like as if they played like 3 football matches. So there's still that physical part that's very important, because we do not dissociate electronic music and physical acts. I mean,
and we also don't try to hide. You're a band that's 30 years old.
27.
Yeah, but almost the same. So you don't try to. I don't see myself trying to do music for that is front for 2008, because then the band you erase all the history. So we're a little bit prisoner also of what it is, what we were, and you cannot fight that. So we play with it, but we know the limitations of what we are. Any band that's that old and that doesn't want tomorrow to do a classical record just to prove the people that they can do something else or be a new thing. You have to stay what you are. Every band that has that problem, I think. It's the big problem of being a musician. It's the biggest frustration is not being front 242, is not being something else sometimes. But that's it.
Do you think it's harder now to make that stance? Because we called it earlier a binary world with the blocks and everything was very black and white a lot. And your sort of edginess appealed to a lot of like people and groups that were more on the sidelines of society, as in like hardcore gay community, for example. Now, 20 years on, we tend to think that it's slightly more liberal, and it's probably not that easy to provoke anymore.
Yes and no, because I think that humankind stays humankind. A person stays a person, and as a person, you make your choices every day. So do not forget that music is also still an artistic discipline that's very primitive. It's not like visuals. In visuals, you have a lot of models. You have a codification in visuals that everybody knows. In music, you have very little symbols. It's still very instinctive and very intuitive art and primitive. So that ability you can have. You can make your choices. You don't have to be blinded by a software. You can oppose yourself to a software. We always come back with our old reflexes to use collage or to do things differently or to drop a software because it's telling us too much what to do. You can rebel to any system as today, maybe more than ever. So I think if you come back to the human qualities of each of us, inside of us, if we're not facing a screen, but we're facing the world, I think if you have that attitude and that you only have a tool in front of you, then you're basically up to do whatever you want to do.
As a member of the team called it a couple of years ago, like, I really hate Logic because it forces me to think like a musician, while everything I always wanted to do was being everything but still create music.
Sure. This is an attitude. I mean, and it can be tougher because you don't enter like the Roland library type of sounds or this type of sound, or you don't have as quickly a result because it's tougher to do something different. It's but also you develop your personality. And music, like I said, being so primitive, is really a good background to develop your personality, more than any visual art, to me.
And today, for me, the biggest problem I have is the lack of... everything is possible, and it's the lack of being able to do something that was the push behind the creativity. Today, there is too many choices, in fact. You have to be, as a musician, you have to put yourself into a challenge position, say, I will create only with this or that, because if you don't, you're overwhelmed by possibilities, and you never end your project.
How do you fight that feeling of being overwhelmed? Because, I mean, like you said, you enter your standard DAW platform and you go, oh gosh, I got tons and tons of terabyte of sound files, too many.
And even every day a new plugin comes out, a new, cut, compressor, whatever, synthesizer, and you all, sometimes I do that, and you push back, you say, wow, this is out, I'll wait that I buy it, and I'll do this on the drum. And you never stop. When I think that we did pieces with 2 and 4 tracks, you had to put everything in those 2 tracks. And that's one thing also, today you can create in phases. You can do a bass line today, and 1 month later do the drum. That was not a possibility before. You had to do your complete song with what you had around you and record it, finish.
I think one of the keys is to maybe spend more time about your creation process. I always take the same examples, and Daniel was mentioning that to me also. In the 80s, when you had a synthesizer, I compared it to a black box, and it was really a black box at the time. And the people who were building those machines didn't really know where those machines were going to lead them. And they needed the feedback from the musicians and to hear certain releases of records to say, oh, the Moog can do this, or the Korg MS-20 can do that, because the people use it a certain way. With time, music was more and more formatted, and it's more like software designers who started to decide what was going to be the sound of tomorrow, rather than the hardware creator or the musician. So you have those banks, and you stick and you stay into those bands. One of the things that has changed a lot also is what I call the interface. To give you an example, when you were watching TV in the 60s, it was black and white, but people had to make an emotional and intellectual effort to see the color in the image. Same for photography. You had 24 or 36 poses. You could not be wrong. You had to do a choice at the base because the frame was in your 36 pictures. If you had one or two good, that was a miracle. As today, people take 3,000 pictures, and some just put it on their hard drive without even having the time to watch it. And this is what technology tells you, the interface, which means the effort between the human and the machine, before forced the people to have ideas, to try to extract something from the machine, but also being influenced by the machine. And it was like a more tougher but interesting relation. As today, the screen is so perfect, your sound is so perfect, that you can be lazy.
So, I mean, we're definitely leading the topic towards sound design. And the actual process of, like, how would you go about it? Like, do you start with a simple waveform, or?
Very often it's coming back to the basics. I mean, for me, like, when you design, I mean, it's hard to say. It's cultural, because you know sounds from what you, if you're very attentive with your ears, if you pay attention to all the sounds that exist in the nature. Basically, when I start a sound design, sometimes the criteria is just, it has to sound different than everything I've heard before. That could be one of the way of doing it, or trying to be purist, or trying to isolate a sound from an environment and trying to work with that to see how a sound is living alone, or, like I say, making parallel with other artistic discipline. Or, I mean, why couldn't you start a song and saying, I think about, I don't know, jealousy, and I'm gonna try to translate jealousy into the music. Then you forced to find codes into your sound design, like it is in visuals, actually, and you go, there's different techniques. It really depends on who. I mean, some people just would like to have a PA in their room and playing it full blast if you have a temper to be somebody crazy. Maybe you can record your whole record like Iggy Pop, like having like a huge PA in front of you and record it with microphone that way. There's no rule. If you let yourself, I come back to that human feeling, if you let yourself go into your true and real impressions, emotions, I think you cannot be wrong.
And one rule that never dominated the way we created music was the rule of notation, the 12 notes. A lot of the time we do pure noise, and in pure noise, in oscillators that, you know, if you let 3, 4, 5 or whatever oscillators turn, at one point there will be a melody created because of the sweeps and everything. And if your ear is there at the moment, only that can be the start of something new. It's never about a keyboard or you know, strings or anything. You can. A lot of the songs, when I want to start a song, it never starts with notes. Never. It starts with me programming something on a synthesizer that sometimes is not even correct. You know, there is no scale, and after that, adding the notes makes that also become what it is. But not being a musician, in fact, for me is my big advantage.
In that sense, I guess especially in Western culture, we do always have to fight these inhibitions of being a real musician and at the same time deeming something worthy. As you say, if you use especially something modular and the machine, you come across so many, you can call it lucky accidents, but so many movements that you possibly can't fathom beforehand. And
This is the magic of synthese, for instance, is that it can bring you in fields that you cannot even imagine. Like you say, you don't have to be a musician. If you train your ear to everything, to the world of sounds, I mean, then you will localize that in what you're doing with the sounds. But this is what we think. I mean, there's tons of ways of doing music, and I mean...
But what I was trying to say is I think it's really hard for us to take some ownership or pride even in in connection with this machine, I kind of created this, because the very notion of being a creator is something we deem really high. And so how do you overcome that and lose...
You don't, because at one point you will discover that it's an asset. When I work a lot with classical trained musicians that play violin, classical instruments. And for them, my lack of musicality, the way I work with machine, for them it's incredible. They have as much respect for me as if I could play violin really well. And it's the same when I see a guy play violin. It's the association with the two things that makes it. And we never see, like I said, I see what I can't do an asset, but also it reflects in other people. It depends who you meet. If, of course, somebody wants to jam and think you will come and play a bass line, it's wrong. But a lot of people don't. They expect you to stay what you are, and they know who you are and how you work, and that's fine for them. If you come, also what I realized working with real musicians is that they don't care what you use to do your music. There is no bad machine for me or for them. I can use whatever machine that I get and make something interesting with it. That's the other thing about today is everybody's looking for the best synthesizer that does this, that, the big bass, the big analog thing, how many different sounds can it make. And you can take an old Krummer piano, put it through some ring modulator effects, and have something incredible. For me, an instrument, there is no basic instrument. I can take a Weevil. I don't know if people know what it is, but it's those little circuit band boxes, that make noise. And just go and do an improvisation concert with percussion player, violin, and I just have that box, and that's all I use with a delay. And you can create really great stuff with any machine.
And probably on the notion of a machine, people tend to forget that, especially in, let's say, the 1600s, and even today, like a really well-built violin is an absolutely amazing piece of technology. And you can also use it in so many different ways to get whatever...
Yeah, it's just wood and 4 strings. Like some synthesizers today are just 4 knobs. If you know how to use the 4 knobs, you can make anything. It depends, if you want to make a bass line, you're fucked. But if you know this machine can do that kind of noise and you use the abilities of the machine, everything is possible. You don't have to look, a lot of people take a synthesizer and they look for the Moog bass. And when you take a synthesizer, you have to look at how it, I always, when I don't know a synthesizer and I want to buy it, I just go and download the manual. I read the manual, see what, even the technical stuff, and I know if that machine is something I want or not. I don't have to hear it. I don't care about the sound. I want to know what it can do. And that's how I choose my machines.
That's kind of an interesting approach, especially since today, obviously, a lot of electronic noises are already connotated in some sort of way, because this will remind you of that, that will remind you of this, oh, that's the sound that yada yada used, and so on and so on. And also at the same time, you can get away in, like, the most boring TV advertisement can get away with a lot more drastic sounds than everything you would have played on stage 15 years ago. And so how how important do you deem the fact to find your very own sounds, or what's your stance on
But
presets?
you never. The problem is that you never do. The older you get, also, the more references you have. I can hear a band today, and for each song, I can say this is, it's a bad thing. It's really bad because.
Does it take the fun away?
The fun and also the creation, because I cannot create music because I have too much. I have a big library in my head, and I do a bass line, and I'm like, oh, this is like that band Can or whatever. The library is so big that it's annoying, and everybody here will have that at one point in his life where he doesn't know where to go because it sounds like something he has done or somebody else has done. So today, I know I listen to music every day. A lot of people are beyond that limitations. But when you have the repertoire and the things we have done, it's very difficult to go and, I cannot go and do, like I said, pansonic music because they did it, or Amon Tobin or whatever. And that's the difficulty, I think, for everybody today, is to find the niche, the thing, where can I live in the world of music?
Do you need a certain naivety in that creation process?
A certain what?
Naivety. Yeah, I think that's a good word. In any form of art, I think to see things sometimes like a child is really helping, because it goes back to the roots, to certain primer feeling. Like I was saying, music's very primer to me. For me, that helps. But that's how you develop your personality. I mean, you ask maybe 3-4 times the same question about, well, but how can we? I think you have to know what you're good at. I mean, you know what you're good at when you have sex. I mean, you may as well have the same selection when you do music and decide this, that, and that. Some people are very particular in certain domain. The music can be something like that too. Not being totally surrounded by software and whatever you have around you, but really precise. What is your personality? Where you think you're good at?
And how you analyze also, because whatever you do, you recycle. And it's how good you recycle your influences that makes that will draw people to, wow, this is great. Because we are, even not music, images, everything has an influence on you. So a good creative guy today is the guy who recycles the best.
That's an awful lot of information in a very short time. Probably we could take a second to, let that simmer in. And how about no comment?
Okay. No comment. Again, it's what I did is I took the original tracks from it was 8 tracks. And it's not mixed, it's just the original stuff that comes from the recorder. So I don't know how it will sound.
Do you still have the tapes stored and all?
Yeah, very badly, but you put them in the oven for some. Yeah, you cook them and they're all right again for one go. But the way we recorded also, only the 2 first albums were done on 8 tracks, and all the rest we lost because we worked. The error we did was believe in technology, and we did everything with computers. So we did it with Atari, then Commodore 64, and we have all the discs, but we have no way to find them, get them back. And on tape, we just recorded what we couldn't put in a machine was the vocals.
So you don't have this little museum at home where you keep like C64s for just the purpose of running that tracker or whatever?
No, I wouldn't be able to use it anymore. I tried.
Load string.
We bought an Atari 1040. I couldn't even use the Steinberg 24. couldn't. Seems to have a little problem here. Okay, here we go. Oh yeah, there's no level. No, it's here. It's coming. Yeah, I just realized, in fact, it's what's on the recorder and the DX7 that they did the main bass line is not there. But what you also see is that there were rhythm boxes, and we played with pitch on rhythm boxes, which was something people couldn't believe. Now you can do that every day, but at that time people were like, "What is this thing?" So maybe I should look for Commander Mix in another format. I'll go for the live thing, but there's no vocals then, if that's not a problem. Or it is.
It's not a problem, but it's probably not a nice lead-in to talk about your usage of vocals. So is there anything that you would have with vocals so we can probably demonstrate?
Welcome to Paradise. It's got sampling, or you need singers' vocals?
Well, it's like, I mean, either or.
This is
like
a song that started with a sampling. It's like religious preachers. It's called Welcome to Paradise. And the sampling actually is conducting the whole track.
Don't have to be poor anymore.
most of the more sample-based things, this obviously is playing around with political notions again. Now, when you're entering the arena of politics, obviously you do put yourself into a lot of trouble easily, because either you get totally misunderstood or you get a lot of attention from the wrong people. It's like, how do you deal with that?
You can expose yourself, there's no problem. I mean, we always took the example at the time of Martin Scorsese with a Taxi Driver. Because of his movie, a guy became like crazy about Jodie Foster and shoot Reagan. I mean, when you do a piece of art or a piece of music or whatever, you're not in control of the way the people will interpret it. So basically it's the same situation. You do what you think you have to do, and the way people will take it is uncontrollable.
We were also mostly really lucky because we were always understood in a very balanced way. You know, things like this, people in the Mormons, they liked it, you know, the young guys, they liked it because they thought really that, because there's that phrase, no sex until marriage in there, and they really thought the message was what it is said, and for us it was the reverse thing. The same thing when we used Gaddafi or the guy, I don't remember his name, Farrakhan?
Farrakhan, yeah.
Yeah.
Farrakhan one was just stirring a little bit of controversy, especially in America.
Yeah, of course, but again, the American people loved it. We speak about the young people, of course, not the politicians.
Was there any exchange? Because obviously, I mean, on so many levels, there's a lot of parallels what you were doing, not only because of sampling Farrakhan, but people like the Bomb Squad and Public Enemy did essentially the same thing. Like,
yeah, I mean, there was a notion of musical terrorist at the time, which you probably wouldn't use it as today. But yeah, you need the.
That's an interesting point. Why do you say you wouldn't use that any day? I mean, don't we have to claim back the term terrorist from right-wing propaganda?
I
in
would,
America?
but I mean, if you might be very quickly in a lot of trouble. I mean, you can. I mean, everybody has been. I mean, a lot of people have been to the States. You can try to say for a joke that you have a bomb in your luggage, but they're gonna nail you anyway. So
and there is less, in fact, intelligence in terrorism and anti-terrorism today than, you know, we played with Islam in the same song, and we never had a problem if we do that today, because there are so many
The Belgian embassies are going to be bombed
unintelligent people we would get in trouble. That's the problem is that you cannot play with, you have, and we are not the only one who says that, writers, everybody says it, you have less liberty to play with stereotypes today than you had 10 years ago.
So, do we need to go back to more, I mean, you can't possibly say more paranoia these days then. I mean, or how do you feel, does the paranoia now differ, this uncertainty in it, how does it differ from the paranoid general climate in the Cold War?
Again, I think in the 80s people were more naive. Now we have much more information about anything that comes to you. You go on the web and you go to Wikipedia and you try to figure out what is really the conflict or what people are trying to tell you. There's even too much information because you cannot make the difference between what's real and not real. So again, I think selection is important, to be able to select, maybe to go to old values. I think it's a good thing that a lot of DJs come back to analog, for instance, because it forces them to go back to another architecture and to rethink how were the base of that electronic music and then develop. But I would say that as today, there are like a lot of very interesting artists. I'm absolutely optimistic about the way things are going. There's so many creators, and I wouldn't say it was better before. It was different.
I think the barriers today are the same barriers. We had also other barriers, like we had to fight the guitar, rock and roll culture. Today, you just have to find a way around. You have a message, and there's things, you know, that you maybe cannot say simply, but you still can, because you're an artist, weave that in your music, art, or whatever, and bring it out. There is, for an artist, there is still no limit, I think. If you're in, you know, you do the stuff intelligently, you bring out whatever you want.
Another interesting notion in the definition of artist is all this kind of music included always a certain cult of the machinery, which obviously plays around with ideological things as well, but like, where do you deem the importance of your actual tool, and how do you prevent yourself from fetishizing?
You serve your ideas. The tool is there to serve your ideas, not the other way around.
And the way you use it as a fetish is to make the people believe that it's more important than what it really is. You use it and you know, but that was that mystery, you know, no names, everything. Machines, we make them more important, more mysterious than they really were. Everybody here will know that a machine is, you know, when you know how to use it, it's nothing.
Nothing has to be forever. You always, it can be an open project. At some point, maybe, surely you have to decide, here I make a decision. But I always like the fact to construct and deconstruct a song, not being afraid to break the magic, because rock music in general and popular music is when people start to feel comfortable and there's something magic and something like appealing. Strange enough, when that was happening, we decided to break it down. But people function differently.
And what we also have, what we did when we created song, we used modular synthesizer modules, and the songs were created the same thing. We did modules, and sometimes one song on an album is in fact 3 different songs that we splice together. Yeah, the chorus, you know, one of the big things when you're not a musician is that the chorus can be anything. You know, you don't care. So you have a good verse and you made a good chorus somewhere else. You take it, you just splice it, and that's how we built the songs too. It was like Lego. You know, you built stuff. A lot of the songs were built like that in the early stages. Still today, I never work a composition out. I just put ideas, I record the ideas, and sometimes when I want a result, I just go and put the ideas together and I have a song.
What is nice sometimes also is like when you work with a collage, for instance, because at the time we had to cut tapes and bring it back, and there weren't like programs like Live Ableton or whoever, whatever plugs to pitch or to fine tune your sound. So basically, when you have a collage and you put a sample, you have to live with it the way it is, not always trying to adapt everything to your song. I think that's sometimes maybe an opportunity to send the song somewhere else if you leave it the way it is.
Do you guys focus on tension and release as well, as much as like just sort of going wherever the music takes you and wherever the sounds reveal where you want to go? Like, because in electronic music, I notice a lot of the time it's like a build-up. It's like boof, and then woof, back down again.
I didn't understand the beginning of your question, actually. The beginning.
Well, just in terms of like the direction for your music, is it based on tension and release, like making it tense and then?
Yeah, well, this is linked to the whole period of time. I know after a while that music has stereotypes also. Like a lot of those tracks starts with a sample and then the bass line starts and it builds up. That's why we're still more attracted in our early works like Geography, where it's important to go to the core of what you want to do. I prefer to work in trying to find the right sound after the other, rather than two builds, because if you build, you come into that sort of trash crap dark wave electronic with those guys screaming. I'm not too much into that type of approach. I prefer to have a purist approach if we can. But again, in our career, people took some of those songs to label the band like EBM or whatever. It's not the only direction, but it became a recipe. It became really a way to do music. It's not my favorite one.
And stepping finally from Sony to Sonics, you make sure that that what you give to people is sounding as good as possible these days, right? I mean, you don't want to give out low-coded MP3s and stuff.
That's a big topic.
A big fight.
Yeah. I'm for the
resolution revolution.
The loudness war that is with the Metallica stuff and all that. I'm fighting. That's another big thing you fight again. Finally, after 10 years, you see that your side is winning because everybody is fed up with that. I want to be louder than the other one. And MP3 is another thing. It's so bad for the music business and the music in general because it has the people the ears work differently. I don't know how to explain it, but the dynamics and everything in music is so influenced by what the MP3 and all that compression culture has done that I hope we go back to something that's better quality than but I don't see it happen. The iPod generation has so much influence on, I think, even artists' ear. They're thinking, how will this sound as an MP3? I'm pretty sure. And it's something I never did, I don't want to do.
It's also because music became something that people expect to have for free. So you have to make concession everywhere, on the standards, on the distribution. And so before, in the 70s, 80s, people had like a vinyl. They were looking at that cover forever, listening several times to the album. Here, music becomes something disposable.
And musicians have to go back. They have to initiate the thing. You know, storage is not a problem anymore. MP3 came because storage and internet speed and those things. That's not a problem anymore today. So musicians should really stand for their, they do music and they want it released like this and not, because doing MP3 with your product is the same as what I said is package your product to make it more, more efficient to be sold to a lot of people.
Yeah, I guess the queue has jumped there in a really interesting way because, I mean, I vividly remember having to literally steal money to go and buy Geography. while now you would just steal the music directly. And I mean, yes, you might save yourself some moral trouble on the foreground, but still, this like music being taken as a commodity is a really interesting notion that somehow, I guess, prevents a lot of people in here from having a career in it.
Yeah. But I mean, when I see all the studios up here, and I see people working probably a long time for a result, trying to really do something on those nice speakers and whatever, and working in details, and then that music will be thrown like for free on any iTunes or whatever web distribution in MP3 is really a shame. It's a shame. I think music has a value, and we should find a way to bring back that value.
But again,
money-wise or different. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
When you're a starting musician, you don't do music to have success. I hope nobody does that in the room. You make music for yourself as best as you can. And even if people, I prefer people stealing geography in a wave format than stealing in MP3, but because at least in wave, they would have the quality, they would have the work that I really wanted to do. And it's just another barrier today. It's everybody steals your stuff. But I'm pretty sure that stealing music on the internet is not a barrier for success. We see that every day. And I think everybody here, they should do the music for themselves and then see what happens with it. But for me, MP3 is not a problem. The stealing is not a problem.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, because it's like, if you spend all the time working out how to do music and working out how to do it, then you can do it. No one can take that away from you. A piece of music is only like a painting. It doesn't matter. I mean, it is important to an extent, but it's like if you're good at reproducing sounds or whatever you do, making music, and you can do that, then you're the person to do it. There's a film to write a soundtrack for. It's not going to stop you. And I mean, it would be nice to see more money coming to musicians, so they can, have a better living environment and all those things. But I mean, we're listening to that guy Melvin, and he bought all of his gear by living on a park bench and lining himself with newspaper so he could get the shit that he wanted to do, what he wanted to do. And it's like I don't know. It's just
But I have the same, when I make music today, I have the same problems as everybody in this room. I know it will be stolen more than I would even sell it. So it's just one more element in the equation of being a musician. I don't know if we can regulate or fight that. It's just, like I said 30 years ago, we had to fight against the mono PAs and the guitar. You don't have a drum, you're not a band. Today we have to fight against, if I make music, it will be stolen. And what do you do about it? You can say we don't like it, and a lot of people do, but that's it. It's one of the things of today. It's your music. If you do something with music, it will be stolen. How do you deal with it? Because it could also push you to make your music another way. Bringing music live, they cannot steal what you do live. So if the fact that music is stolen so much makes everybody here do live things more, that the success will come maybe with the live thing, and then you will sell records, or what I prefer to call it merchandise then. And also we have maybe to come back to something that's more artistic, because a CD is only a product. A CD, it's like a box of cookies in a supermarket for me. When you do your music, you also package it, and you make the product
an object,
be something special, the mystery ever, all that stuff. People will not want to steal that, or they will steal the music and then want the package. That's usually how I see a lot of people discover new things is they steal music, and then because the music spoke to them, they want the package, they want everything that goes behind it. I think it's just one more negative thing that can only be positive in the future for musicians. Sorry.
There
I
are
like
other
the way
ways.
you turn it around, and yeah, just like obstacles, and like if you want to survive, start to fight. And fight
Because
a good
everybody is back there. It's not only the starting musicians. Everybody's back at that thing, and everybody has to fight against it. And my way to fight against it is not to, bitch about Napster and all and whatever. Is to how can I now do a product that people will want to buy, and
It's also a more global problem because it's how not to be enslaved by the internet. Everybody's on the internet. One day I ask myself, can I disappear from the internet, not having my name anymore on it? It's impossible. So basically, people don't go to the cinema anymore. They download torrents, or this becomes the central god. This becomes like the big brother. Somehow it's a lot of freedom. Somehow it's also a lot of evil, because it's probably, if we come back to the 80s, if I had to be a musical terrorist, I would probably want to fight the internet. This is my enemy today. Although there's a lot of positive things and great things about it, how do you manage to find your way in there, not to be totally absorbed by it and enslaved by it?
And even the disappearance of the labels for me is a good thing, because it will bring musicians back together. The big thing that labels do is have musicians fight it, or I know that you got this for your record, and and on every label we've been, there was that fight, and maybe the disappearance with labels will push all the musicians together, and maybe 10 people in this room will create a label for their music. That's what's going to happen. I think the future is, there is a lot of things you can do in the future. And just, it's like if we had the big crash with the financial thing, what can you do about it? You can just build a new future, or you can drop your arms. I'm more like, let's try something else then.
Hello. Sorry, can I ask a question? It was interesting you said earlier that you, talking about collaboration, that you guys don't work together in the studio. And I was wondering whether, we're all here, we're all doing this thing together, and there's a lot of talk of collaborations happening. I was wondering if you've collaborated with any other musicians, and if so, what is your approach or approaches to that?
I have the same approach in the band and outside the band. I never work with somebody. I can't. Basically, it came from my inability to work with somebody, and it's become, for a lot of people, that's a good thing. So they work with me, but they know we'll never be in the same room. So they send me stuff, I send back other, and sometimes at the end stage you're together. But again, it's never been a barrier to do something with anybody. I work with a lot of people like that.
It's very linked also on complementary. If you collaborate, it has to be something complementary. It's also important to have an idea of the person you have in front of you, the personality of the person, because very often if you match somebody, then there are chances it's going to work. And it's also important that every person know its own limits. If you find a person who's good in this field and will not interfere with what you're doing, then you have the perfect mate. It's very important like that. And yeah, like I say, the human feeling is sometimes more important really than the real talent of the person, because you need to find complementary people that will add something, because at the end of the day, everybody works for a certain result. But of course, who is taking over the other one in how the final music piece is gonna end? With Front 242, the luck we had is that each person has, it's like a closet with drawers, and each person's got a drawer and knows exactly what's their work within the little factory or whatever, and we all work for the same logo. And when that is understood, you can progress.
I also discovered very early that working with people together, music, and I think every artist is a little bit of a dictator somewhere. And when you work with somebody in the same room, there is that other thing that's called respect. And there's a lot of things you will not do out of respect for that other person because you're together in that room. And maybe that's a big, problem in the creation. So I rather get the stuff, be good friends with the guy on another base, but not be, not have barriers because I have respect and this, and I think maybe, you also have the thing, oh, maybe he wants this from me. And you don't have that when you work at a distance. And if you want to, the only way I work with people together is when they say improvise. I do improvisation with a lot of different people, and nothing is expected from you. You don't try to build a song, and that's the only way I can work with people. It's like a band. Again, a band, if you're 4 people together, there is always, maybe even if they don't know it, there is a leader. There is somebody that pulls the stuff. And when you work together, not as a band, but not together, each in his corner is pulling his stuff. And that's the magic formula for Front 242 has always been that.
But also for a lot of people who work alone here, it is important to have a feedback. If you work alone, very often you go in the same direction and you stick with it, and somehow, if you're obsessed by something and you know exactly what you want to do, then fine. But the feedback is very important, and it's not always people from the musical world that are the most important feedbacks. Sometimes artists is nice, but maybe choose an artist from another discipline to have a view on what you're doing. It's always, for me, it was always a good way to have a feedback.
Same thing in music. You have music and there will be no drums in it. Ask a drummer what he thinks of it. You don't want drums, and you will be really amazed at what he will tell you, and you will discover for yourself, yeah, this is something I've been looking for a month, and he has the solution because he's a drummer and he thinks different, like a painter will think different. It's all, that's, for us to working together is not a solution. You need to be able to give your work and have somebody tell you the big nasty truth sometimes about what you're doing. But it opens your ears and your eyes also to the problems. And sooner or later you realize, I've been blocked by this thing so long, and he tells me why.
Thanks.
Well, I think this is the time now that we say thanks to Patrick and Daniel for unleashing.
Thank you too.